So I just wanted to say how much I have been enjoying the Dharma talks on this Dogen's fascicle, painting of a rice cake, and finding them comforting and soothing for some reason. I think maybe because I'm aware of needing comfort and soothing at this time, and also so grateful for the container and the beautiful holding of our group that's been happening, thanks to the Shuso and to the wonderful workshop leaders who have been just providing this container for us to be and have our experience, which is, Bokushu told us last night, this is all Dogen wants. He wants us to have our own experience. So I was thinking, well, what could I find in the text that might be also helpful, comforting? I don't know if I came up with anything comforting per se, but I was remembering that, that Dogen too lived at a very difficult time, you could say an apocalyptic crisis time. Japan, early 13th century, bandits and robbers roaming the countryside, even monks were armed. We lament the hollowing out of our venerable institutions when you have armed monks going about sacking other monasteries. That can't have been much fun. There were also, during his time, incessant earthquakes, fires, murders, epidemics, and famines. And we know, too, that Dogen, from an early age, had an accentuated sense of impermanence with the loss of both parents at an early age. So in a poem he says, "To what shall I liken the world? Moonlight reflected in dewdrops, shaken from a crane's bill. To what shall I liken the world? Moonlight, reflected in dewdrops, shaken from a crane's bill." So this is the world. This is our world, shimmering surface of projections of all of our fears, our dreams, our hopes, our experiences evanescent, vanishing. And given that that's the nature of this world, then how do we practice? So he says, at each moment, don't rely upon tomorrow. Think of this day and this hour only, and of being faithful to the way, while given a life even just for today. For the next moment is uncertain and unknown. So clearly at a time when the world that we know it is slipping away, we don't know what will replace it. Sounds like he's not a bad guy to consult. But what does it mean to be faithful to the way? Well, in the fascicle of the painting of a rice cake, there's a line that says, "Make earth, water, fire, and wind your vital activity. Make mind, consciousness, and wisdom your great death. Make earth, water, fire, and air your vital activity. Make mind, consciousness, and wisdom your great death." So this is the line I'd like us to look at. So some of you will remember when Griff Folk was at the Zendo, one of the things he let us know was that Dogen relied extensively on the Chinese masters for his writings. So obviously this reference to the four elements, earth, wind, water, fire, would have come from the Chinese system of elements, seeing the universe as comprising these elements. And so here we find in the record of Rinzai, or Linqi, master in 9th century China, 400 years before Dogen, he's instructing his followers. He says, don't just drift along pursuing comfort. Rinzai was not a guy who dealt in comfort, doling out comfort. Don't drift along pursuing comfort. Value every second. Each successive thought moment passes quickly away. The grosser part of you is at the mercy of the four elements, earth, water, fire, and wind. The subtler part of you is at the mercy of the four phases, birth, being, decay, and death. Followers of the way, you must right now apprehend the state in which the four elements are formless, so that you may avoid being buffeted about by circumstances. So someone very helpfully asked, and what is the state in which the four elements are formless? The master replied, an instant of doubt in your mind and you are obstructed by earth. An instant of lust in your mind and you're drowned by water. An instant of anger in your mind and you're scorched by fire. An instant of joy in your mind and you're blown about by wind. Gain such discernment as this, and you're not turned this way and that by circumstances, making use of circumstances everywhere. How is this possible? Because you've realized the four elements are like dreams, like illusions. Followers of the way, the you who right now is listening to my discourse is not the four elements. This you makes use of the four elements. If you can fully understand this, you are free to go or to stay as you please. So, this is Rinzai in what, 9th century China? That's 1,200 years ago. And it's pretty close to what 21st century neurobiology is telling us about how the emotions operate. So let's say earth, water, fire, and air represent the energetic responses we have to stimuli. So let's say, for example, you read an email or a tweet you find upsetting, and immediately your blood pressure spikes, and you find yourself growing angry or anxious or distracted, unable to focus on your work. Well, neurobiology describes this as the workings of our autonomic nervous system. It springs into action to protect us from danger. Evolution provided us with the ability to make these rapid-fire decisions to protect us so that we might need to, for example, run up a tree if a tiger is chasing us, or, face down an enemy. The brain just sends these messages to pump adrenal into the glands, pump us up with these hormones that get us into this ability to move fast and to have tremendous power. Now, is the sound okay? No? I should speak louder. So that's our primitive, what do they call it, the lizard brain that is instantaneous. And, we've got now the limbic system that's more modern, and, I'm sorry, not the limbic, the neocortex, that allows us to delay response and make a more considered decision. Do I need to react instantaneously? Is my life actually in danger? Do I really need to respond to this email or this tweet? Or can I just chill for a while? Or even say, there's nothing I can do about this right now. Let me just calm myself, restore my homeostasis, and get back to work. So neurobiology says, depending on the circumstance, our first reaction will be fight or flight, freeze or fawn. In other words, we are at the mercy of fire, water, wind, or earth. So what Rinzai and Dogen are saying is that when we find ourselves hijacked by emotional reactivity that springs up in response to events, we can work with these energies in a way that allows us to harness their power and use them for awakening. Harness their power, and, as Rinzai helpfully said, to see the four phases of something that arises, grows, flowers into being, it crests, climaxes, and then decays. Everything, every phenomenon follows that cycle, comes into being, flowers, crests, decays, is extinguished. And this is what we do in zazen, of course. In the stillness, when the body is still and our attention is mobilized, we can monitor these micro movements, these phenomena, thoughts, sensations, impulses, and see how they come, they flower, and then they move on. So we experience on the cushion the reality of emptiness, which is wisdom. Off the cushion, the challenge is greater because the attention factor, you see, unless it's cultivated, we can be thrown off, can't we? Because they can be very powerful, these elements. So, Dogen is saying, make earth, water, fire, and air your vital activity. Make mind, consciousness, and wisdom your great death. A monk once asked, I can't remember who it was, maybe Tozan. I know one of you will know. How can I overcome heat and cold? And the master said, why don't you go to that place where there is no heat and cold? And the monk says, well, yeah, where is that? And the master said, when it's cold, let the cold kill you. And when it's hot, let the heat kill you. So that you, that's being killed, is the separate sense of me that says, no, that's not me. We don't do anger. We don't do fear. We don't do, like the man in the White House, we don't do vulnerability. That's not what we do. Can't allow himself to actually experience it. And so in that way, we can't experience the depth of what I am holding on to out of a sense of perpetuating a sense of who I am. Certainly, many of us in our conditioning, we are told even our experience of gender excludes certain experiences. Doesn't belong. If you're a woman, you don't have certain experiences. If you're a guy, you don't. And so I'd like to just go a little further and examine these elements and see how that, yeah, we do have preferences, because of our conditioning. That all of these things are totally neutral, and yet many of us have preferred ways, preferred elements of responding, resorting to certain elements and not others to respond. So let's begin with fire. So as we said, the fire element, it equates to the fight response that happens when we feel we're in danger. But we can overpower the threat. So being in the grip of this energy, that gets pumped in with the fight energy, very powerful. And it can allow us, it mobilizes us to address a situation we believe is unfair or unjust. Gives us the energy. The feeling inside is of heat, having a tight stomach, wanting to punch or attack. And yeah, it's triggered by injustice, feeling criticized, ignored, or responding to the inactivity or passivity of others. So clearly, recently, we see the Black Lives Matter protests is a clear example of this. Another was, I think, this week of witnessing Alejandra Ocasio-Cortez making a speech in response to a senator who had insulted her on the steps of the Congress. And she had let it pass when it happened. I mean, he used expletives in addressing her. He was demeaning, disgusting, offensive in the extreme, bullying. And she had decided, all right, so what's new? And was simply going to go home and let it pass. But the media picked up on it. It was caught on camera, and so he had to apologize on the Congress floor. He made this half-hearted justification, claiming he was a family man and all the rest. And it was then she mobilized to make a speech that was extraordinary for its quiet eloquence in how she took that personal situation to use it to make a larger point about the routine misogyny and violence directed towards women at the hands of powerful men who do it without impunity. She skillfully channeled her fury into a inspiring speech that was not shaming. If you haven't heard it, I urge everybody to, as a model for how to use what they're talking about, the energy of fire, skillfully. Fire can destroy, we know. Fire can cause wounds, it can hurt relationships. But fire can also, it can be used to address wrongs. It can be used to radiate a cancer. Audre Lorde described her anger as a lifelong response to systemic racism. She described it as a product of the larger social landscape rather than a private emotional ecology. And of course, Audre Lorde, you know, for my generation too, really stood out for that capacity to own anger, you know, at a time which is still there, that women shouldn't get angry. It's okay for a guy. So that brings us to water. Oftentimes as women, when we're angry, we cry. That's our conditioning. So whereas fire is hot, water is wet. And it looks more like a kind of collapse or surrender. So tears obviously are less confrontational than anger. They don't jeopardize the relationship as much as anger does. So the water element wants to appease. It wants to eliminate conflict, to retain the support of the other it depends on. There's a reluctance or inability to stand one's ground, to speak one's truth for fear of reprisal. You see it in the yesing that goes on. Well, in any dictator's circle, that's what you have. Water types who are able to say yes, even though privately they feel something else. When in the grip of the water element, our thinking is clouded, maybe confused, our mood listless, even depressed. And we also associate drug addiction, alcohol use to that kind of, that haze of oneness that we can enjoy when under the influence, which is different than the starkness of differentiation. At its noblest, the water element can be very attuned to the other, allowing one to be compassionate and forgiving But at its worst, it can turn to tuning out one's own truth, especially when our truth may make things awkward for a powerful other or others. And so for this reason, in trauma studies, it's called the fawning response. If I please you, you'll stay. Air or wind. And this corresponds to the flight response that comes online when we believe we can overcome a stressor or danger by fleeing a situation. Clearly, sometimes leaving is our best option. And we think of refugees fleeing situations that have become untenable in their own countries because of persecution or war. But when it's resorted to as a default position, it means avoiding any situation that might be challenging or that risks making us feel vulnerable. So we withdraw, or disappear, make ourselves small, rather than stay to experience feelings we don't want to experience. They might be as trivial as boredom, which we have to experience plenty in sitting. But off the cushion, we might see how we might avoid that, by the million and one ways we have exit strategies. One, of course, is also staying busy. Air experiences fear. Fear of being overwhelmed by the demands others might make on us, or of one's own sensations. So we can avoid that by disconnecting from the body. One clue that we're avoiding feelings is, that old familiar thing of where we get stuck in obsessive thoughts, like a gerbil on a wheel. Goes round and round. We can't get off. And so a way out might be to say, all right, what is it I don't want to feel? What is it I don't want to experience about this situation? We do that with our stories. We'd rather tell stories than actually experience what was happening. And then finally, earth. Earth could be the freeze response, which just stays still. And we can see that in the response that kind of just hunkers down, gets very stubborn, very rigid. There's an armor, there's an unyieldingness. And we can certainly see that also in the kind of ideologies that have sprung up, on either side with their doctrinaire, rigid, deterministic kinds of schemas. There's no room for nuance or individuality. It's all kind of a simple formula. One of the more promising, I think, ideas which Yuka mentioned that is abroad right now about how to deal with the inequity that's facing us is that even despite the laws that have been passed, how it's still so present in our educational, economic, health systems, And one avenue that's been explored is that all peoples have experienced trauma, and that trauma gets passed down. And that until our own wounds are addressed, we will perpetrate them, continue to inflict them by needing to others, dominate others. And therefore it's suggested that we need to do that work. And in a certain way, I feel that this is what Dogen is saying, by saying, take these emotions that course through us and sit with them and be with them and tolerate them, so that we don't feel the need to act them out, however we do. And how do we do that? Well, that's the practice. By allowing ourselves to fully experience each moment as it is, without rejecting anything. And this was not easy for Dogen either. His poem here, I think, says that, says as much. All my life, false and real, right and wrong tangled, playing with the moon, ridiculing wind, listening to birds, many years wasted seeing the mountain covered with snow. This winter I suddenly realized snow makes a mountain. Many years wasted seeing the mountain covered with snow. This winter I suddenly realized snow makes a mountain. So I hear that as it's our very contradictions, our imperfections that make us who we are. All of our flaws, all of our failings, all of our struggles. That's what makes this being that has come with all of the crossroads and conditionings of history embodied in this time, in this moment. In each moment, those strands, those rivulets are flowing into our hands, into our bodies, for us to awaken them, to awaken these energies that otherwise will carry on and do the play havoc the way they will. So we, with that attitude, I think then we see that all of our difficulties are to be bowed to as the very precious ingredients that make this the life that it is, a life that cannot be compared to any other life. So, as Grandpa Maizumi Roshi would say, that's appreciated. Thank you for your attention.